How on earth did the world get pulled into the single most destructive war in all of human history? It's a massive question, one that we've been grappling with for decades. And to really find the answer, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Okay, so picture this. September 1st, 1939. German tanks are pouring across the Polish border. Just 2 days later, Britain and France declare war on Germany. Just like that, the fragile peace that held Europe together for 20 years completely shatters and the continent is thrown right back into a massive conflict. But here's the thing. This war didn't just pop up out of nowhere. No way. Its roots go deep, all the way back to the end of the last Great War, World War I. The so-called peace that ended the First War, well, it was actually planting the seeds for the second. Yeah, the Treaty of Versailles. It was supposed to create a peace that would last forever. Instead, it pretty much became the kindling for the next global fire. Let's break down how that happened. So Germany wasn't even invited to the negotiating table. They were basically just handed a list of demands and forced to sign. The country was stripped of huge chunks of valuable territory, its military was practically dismantled, and it was saddled with a crushing debt of what amounted to billions of dollars in reparations. But the real sting, the most damaging part, was probably the war guilt clause. It forced Germany to accept 100% of the blame for starting the war. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a profound national humiliation. And out of that feeling of humiliation grew this really poisonous idea, the stab-in-the-back myth. This story, which was pushed hard by military leaders, claimed that the German army was never actually beaten on the battlefield. Oh no, they were betrayed by weak, cowardly politicians back home. This lie became an incredibly powerful weapon for nationalists who absolutely despised the new democratic government. The new German government, known as the Weimar Republic, was basically born into total chaos. The streets were literal battlegrounds between communists and nationalists, and the economy? It was in an absolute freefall. In 1923, hyperinflation made money so worthless that people's life savings were wiped out overnight. Then, as if that wasn't enough, the 1929 Wall Street crash slammed into Germany, leaving over 6 million people without a job. For so many Germans, any faith they had in democracy just crumbled. This widespread despair created a massive power vacuum, and right into that vacuum stepped a whole new breed of leader, the extremist who promised to bring back national pride and order, not through politics, but through sheer force, no matter the cost. Let's take a look at who these aggressors were. Over in Italy, you had Benito Mussolini. The country was a mess of strikes and political paralysis, and he swooped in, promising to crush his opponents and bring back the glory of the Roman Empire. In 1922, he and his black shirts literally marched on Rome. The king, terrified of a civil war, just handed him the keys and made him prime minister. And just like that, Europe had its first fascist dictator. Meanwhile, in Germany, a failed artist and angry World War I veteran named Adolf Hitler was harnessing all of that national rage. He gave the people scapegoats to blame for all their problems and swore he would tear up the Treaty of Versailles. But his ultimate goal was to conquer Lebensraum, or living space, in Eastern Europe for a new German empire. By 1933, he had cleverly manipulated the system to become Chancellor, putting himself in the perfect position to destroy democracy from the inside out. And all the way over in the Pacific, Japan was facing its own set of crises. They had a booming population, but a desperate lack of natural resources, like oil and rubber. For the military leaders, the answer was simple: imperial conquest. Their first target, the resource-rich region of Manchuria in China. It was just the first step in a plan to dominate all of Asia. So you've got these aggressive, expansionist powers on the rise. What do the world's democracies do about it? Well, they were still traumatized by the sheer slaughter of World War I and, frankly, crippled by the Great Depression. So they chose a policy of, well, inaction. They kept giving in, hoping to avoid another war. This was the policy of appeasement. The pattern became painfully clear, and so did the world's timid response. In 1931, Japan invades Manchuria. The League of Nations says, hey, stop that, but does absolutely nothing. In 1935, Italy invades Ethiopia. The League puts on some weak sanctions that are basically a joke. Then, in 1936, Hitler marches his troops into the Rhineland, a huge violation of the Versailles Treaty. Britain and France? They do nothing. With every single unanswered move, the dictators just got bolder and bolder. This whole policy really hit its peak at the Munich conference. Britain and France were so desperate to avoid war that they literally handed over a piece of another country, the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia, to Hitler. And the Czechs, they weren't even invited to the meeting about their own country. All the Allies got in return for this was a worthless piece of paper with Hitler's promise on it. The British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, flew home and was greeted like a hero. He waved that agreement in the air and famously declared that he had secured peace in our time. You can just imagine the wave of relief that swept across Europe. But sadly, it was all built on a complete fantasy. Yeah, that peace lasted less than 6 months. In March of 1939, Hitler's armies just rolled into the rest of Czechoslovakia, shattering his promise. This was a game changer. He was now conquering non-German lands, proving his ambitions went way beyond just uniting German-speaking people. Appeasement hadn't stopped a war. It had just delayed it and made Hitler stronger. So, with the policy of appeasement lying in ruins, the path to war was wide open. And the final steps toward that war happened with absolutely breathtaking speed. The final jaw-dropping twist came when two mortal enemies, Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union, signed a non-aggression pact. The world was just stunned. This was a deal made out of pure, cynical self-interest. For Hitler, it meant he could invade Poland without having to fight a war on two fronts. For Stalin, it bought him precious time to rearm his military. And secretly, they even agreed to carve up Poland between them. When Germany invaded Poland, they unleashed a revolutionary new kind of warfare, Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Look, this was not the slow, grinding trench warfare of World War I. This was all about speed, shock, and terror. Panzer tanks would smash through enemy lines, Stuka dive bombers would scream down from the sky, and fast-moving infantry would race in to surround and completely destroy entire armies. The result was absolutely devastating. Poland, an army that, believe it or not, still relied on horse-mounted cavalry, was completely crushed in just 4 weeks. It was a brutal wake-up call about the power of modern mechanized war. And if you thought that was shocking, what happened next was just terrifying. 6 weeks. That's all it took for Hitler's war machine to conquer France, which was considered one of the greatest military powers in the world. They just bypassed all the big defenses and punched right through a forest the French thought was impassable for tanks. But in the middle of this absolute catastrophe, something that can only be described as a miracle happened at Dunkirk. Pinned against the English Channel, over 338,000 British and French soldiers were rescued from the beaches by a ragtag fleet of Navy ships, fishing boats, even civilian yachts, all while under constant attack from the air. The British army was saved from annihilation, but France was lost. So you see, from the flawed Peace of Versailles to the rise of these brutal new ideologies and the disastrous failure of appeasement, the path to this moment was paved with one bad calculation after another. By the summer of 1940, Hitler was the master of Europe. The Nazi flag was flying over Paris, and Great Britain stood completely alone, the last island of defiance against a seemingly unstoppable force. The question on everyone's mind was simple: could they possibly survive?